Louisiana versus all y'all. Jerit Roser here with Sam Spiegelman of Rivals, and we're getting ready to head up to the Louisiana High School State Championships for these next few days. 4 days in beautiful downtown Natchitoches at Northwestern State University. 9 games, 18 teams, and a ton of talented players. And so on Tiger Details on the Rivals Network, I put up a list of kind of the top 10 guys that LSU fans should probably know and be familiar with, whether they're signees, commitments, have offers, or may soon. But I wanted to chat with you kind of more generally about some guys that we're just kind of excited to see or intrigued to see, not necessarily, guys that are going to end up at LSU, or some of my guys are certainly not ending up at Power Fives. They're committed to some G5s and stuff like that. But I'm excited to get up there and see some of these guys regardless, man. How are you feeling about the drive? You have to leave the city and go to North Louisiana to see him this year.
You already know how upset I am. So that was a toss-up. I'm so unhappy, but I have been spending the last 10 days trying. So obviously you mentioned Tiger Details, our colleague Julie Boudwin. I didn't know how to say Lafayette correctly until July, and I've been living here almost 9 years. So now I had a new challenge after mastering Lafayette over the summer, was learning how to say Natchitoches. How is that? How does that sound right?
It's
Natchitoches?
good. How the hell were you pronouncing?
I did say Natchitoches a couple of times for.
Yeah, you gotta fix that for sure.
I know. Well, there's East Texas, and I spend some time there, and then there's Natchitoches, where I don't spend a lot of time until this week. We'll have a lot of good memories made in beautiful downtown Natchitoches. I'm so excited for our beautiful Marriott and beautiful Alexandria, which is a great town, a great little town that I have been in. But I'm super excited because the state playoffs, it's just crazy because we're preparing to flip the calendar to 2021, right? And it's like, you're not used to doing state playoffs around Christmas time. It's all done by now. So I'm just excited that there's all the state championships. It's in one venue. It's going to be outside, and we've been blessed with beautiful weather, it looks like, which I'm really excited about. We get to do it. We do this every year, Jerit. So I'm just excited that we get to do some semblance of normalcy. And we got a ton of talent for some of the best teams in the state, that some we expected to be there and some were a little surprised to see them there, but all the more. And a lot of these guys I've been fortunate enough to see at least maybe once this year. So seeing a kid or a team twice is always it always just gives you a little bit more confidence in your evaluation and your analysis moving forward.
So we'll get kind of right into some of that. We each have 10 players ranked that we're most intrigued or excited to see. And that's not necessarily saying that these are in order our 10 best prospects in the state. And I mean, we'll be looking at multiple different classes as well. So a lot of different variation. It's just kind of, for whatever reason or another, guys that we are excited to see this week. Some cases, like you mentioned, the second time we'll get a chance to see them, or maybe the first time this season, or maybe they're back from an injury, or it's just a good matchup where you can kind of see them tested a little bit. And so I'll kind of let you start with your number 10 as we just jump right into it. Who you got at number 10 starting out?
Well, let's start it with a tie. I had to do a tie for 10. So should I? Okay, at the end, I'll run back the guys who just missed the cut, because there are some really good players. And you mentioned a couple of young guys that haven't even got offers that will be getting offers, in some time, that I think we're all in the mix. So my 10th is tied between Alexandria tight end Shield Taylor, a Stanford signee, and Quincy Wiggins, the fantastic, super athletic defensive end junior out of Madison Prep. When you talk about Shield Taylor, the Stanford signee from Alexandria, there's 2 tight ends on my list. So I'll give you a preview with that. Shield is an old school tight end. He's a fantastic blocker, key element in Alexandria's running game. Obviously, they're going to be going against Acadiana, which is a powerhouse. So they are truly the Cinderella here. And if Alexandria is going to make this a game, I think what a lot of people will see, and you don't see a lot of it on Shield's tape, but I think he's going to have to get involved in the passing game to kind of change things up. And he's a really fantastic receiver. When he committed to Stanford, you saw on tape, just takes a ton of contested catches, and he's very well-rounded. He's maybe not going to be the guy like Jack Betch who's going to catch, 15 passes in a game, but when he does touch the ball, he does make things happen. He's a key foundational piece in that running game. And Quincy Wiggins, I think, has a chance to be the number one defensive end in the state for next year. I think this time next year, we're going to be talking about Quincy as maybe a top 10 player in the state. He's not there yet, but in spurts, he is truly just wreaks havoc on defense. He's so athletic. He's so long. He's got a great motor. I think consistency is the only, obstacle ahead of him. But if Madison Prep is going to win a state championship, I can assure you that one of the ways to doing it is Quincy Wiggins just setting the edge in the run game. And that's something we've seen another, we know his future is as a pass rusher. But, you think about guys like Savion Jones, the way he set the edge against Jennings last year in the state championship, what he did against Edie White earlier. I think Quincy Wiggins has a similar ceiling to those fantastic edge rushers we've seen from Louisiana in the past.
Yeah, and both of those guys were guys just outside of my top 10 that I definitely wrote on here and had ranked. And if I was going to 12 or 13, they're probably in there for a lot of the same reasons you just mentioned. Shields a guy that I have not seen. I haven't seen Alexandria play on a Friday night or what. I mean, they'll play on a Wednesday night this time around, but I haven't seen them in person this year. And so to go see a guy who is one of the top 15 to 20 players in the state playing against a team like Acadiana before he goes off to Stanford would be a lot of fun. And Quincy, I have had a chance to – part of the reason he's not in my 10 is because I've seen him like 3 or 4 times this year because they're right around the corner from me here in Baton Rouge. And I think you're going to really enjoy him in that matchup that you mentioned, trying to slow down the Union Parish rushing attack. And he has gotten so much better through the course of this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing where he can be next year. But my number 10, I put Carson Bruno, big defensive lineman from Byrd, who is going to have his hands full trying to deal with that Catholic High rushing attack with all the running backs in that Bears backfield. He's a guy that's signed to go to Louisiana Tech, and with him being all the way up in Shreveport, he's a guy that I have not seen in person, and I think this is a really good matchup to see what he can do in the front of that Yellow Jackets defensive line. I messed with him a couple days ago about the big play in pass rush against Curtis, where Curtis finally throws the ball because they're in 3rd and long, and he jumps up and snatches it and heads the other way. And so he showed a little bit of what he can do, kind of pinning his ears back and getting into the backfield too. But I'm interested to see how he matches up with the Bears, because that could be a fun matchup on the end of that first night on Sunday.
No question. You know that Catholic is going to run the ball over and over again. They're absolutely loaded in the backfield with the senior and George Hart, and someone who didn't make the cut for me, but someone I'll definitely be watching is junior running back Corey Singleton. When we saw him against STM, he screams Power 5 running back to me. I could see him playing at the next level on Saturdays at some pretty high levels, and if Byrd is going to keep us a game, they're going to have to, Bruno's going to have an impact slowing down that running game. My number 9, I know he's on your list. I can already guarantee he's on your list. Jordan Allen was extraordinary the last time we saw him play against AJ Johnson. We can talk about Sage Ryan, and we will later on, spoiler alert, and we can talk about Brylan Green, who is a casualty of you making me limit this to 11 people out of 10. But Jordan Allen is the guy that LCA trusts to travel with the best receiver. They let Sage come in and out on defense, which I think is extraordinary for such an all-world talent that Sage is. But they trust Jordan enough, and he has help over the top. In this particular game against St. Charles Catholic, it's a Frank Monica coach team. I don't expect them to be airing it out like Arch Manning and Newman and AJ Johnson and Kai Donaldson. So I think after Jordan's fantastic effort in the semifinals in New Orleans, I think we're going to see a chance where Jordan has to be really physical, slowing down the run game. I think that Monica is going to be creative with how many people he has running the ball, and there can be some gadget plays. It can be quarterback runs like they did in the semis. I'm anxious to see, but Jordan's stock is up. He's had a fantastic year, and you talk about Sage and Brylan, but Jordan has done enough to really put himself in the conversation as one of the best DBs in the state for 2022.
Yeah, you will be surprised that Jordan was not in my top 10.
I am.
He's probably one of my top handful or so of prospects I'm excited about in the class overall in 2022. And I had him, and I mean Quincy as well for that matter, on my list of 10 people for LSU fans to know, because even though neither one of them has an LSU offer yet, I think there's a really good chance that both could by the time they're having to make a college decision. But Jordan, for me, I was very excited to see him in that Newman game and match up against AJ the way he did, as you mentioned. And I'd had a chance to see him against Acadiana early this year, and then we both went out there for the Notre Dame game. And so I've seen him a little bit in kind of those different types of matchups at points, and I was really looking forward to seeing him tested the way he was tested against Newman, and he passed that with as many flying colors as you can possibly pass a test, not allowing a single completion. And so I have him kind of outside of this just because I feel so much more comfortable with where he is now after having seen him so many times this year, but certainly looking forward to him continuing to develop. One guy I am shocked I haven't gone to see this team this year, and it's someone that we talked about going to see in the semis before we ended up staying closer to home and going to Carr Easton, was Kendra Williams, the running back at Karen Crow, who's committed to go to UL and play for the Cajuns. He's a guy that I think is, as much as we talk about Logan Diggs and Catravian Hargrove, I think Kendrell's in that next mix of some top running backs in the state in this senior class. And he's going to have the opportunities. Karen Crow is going to keep feeding him, but they're going to have to find some level of success against an Endicott defense that is loaded as well. And so I think he's someone I'm interested to see from a standpoint of one of those top prospects I haven't seen in person this year, as well as I think Karen Crow matches up as well with Carr as anyone that has tried to challenge them in the Dome in recent years. And if he can have some success, then maybe it's a pretty interesting game, but he's going to be a key piece to them trying to have that sort of success and potentially end this long run that Carr has had.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it during the second half of the Carr Easton game. If you're Karen Crow, you have a team philosophy designed to beat Ed Carr. I think it's great that Carr is kind of the underdog as they drive for 5. But Karen Crow certainly has the recipe, the formula, and he's a big part of it. If you can establish the run and keep the Carr offense off the field, you're going to have to make the Carr defense come up with a play, which they've done, for several years in a row. But I'm very intrigued by that matchup, and my number 8 is going to coincide with that perfectly. Taiji Hill. He's a 4-star on Rivals, but to be perfectly honest, Taiji has kind of underwhelmed a little bit. I've kind of wanted to see him develop and progress more, but he still plays a fantastic role, and he's going to play an even bigger role this week. This is the game plan designed for him. They need to slow down the run. They need to get their defense off the field, and what Taiji has done in the past against really quality interior offensive linemen like Cedric Van Pran, he's been able to absorb multiple blockers and really allow those athletic Carr linebackers to get to the ball. So it's kind of a selfless move. So when I say Taiji's been underwhelming, because I know how good of a pass rusher he is, I know how dominant he can be, but he plays a team first role in order to drive for 5. So what I would love to see is Taiji just kind of go lose it and make a ton of plays in the backfield. He's really athletic for his 300 plus frame. I love to see him run up and down the line and show how versatile, athletic he can be. But I really am curious to see how the Karen Crow O-line handles him. Are they going to put a double team? Do they think that, will they give him opportunities to make plays? And if so, will he exploit it?
Yeah, and we coincidentally both slot Carr guys in as our number 8s, because I put Aaron Anderson on here, a guy that we've seen a ton of both this year and through the years, but now he is the newly minted LSU commit, Aaron Anderson. And so I think he's going to have more attention on him from every direction. I think for as much as he's meant to that Carr team through the years, coming on as a returner early on as a freshman, I think this is an opportunity for a lot more people around the state than ever before to kind of find out, oh, that is that speedy little dude that they've been talking about out of New Orleans for all these years. And so I'm just interested to see now with that little LSU commit moniker or whatever slapped in front of his name, how he comes out there and plays. We've seen him and Destin Hill both excel pretty much every time out that we've had a chance to see them play a full game this year. And I think Destin has kind of led that offense in terms of the top target for the sophomore quarterback, AJ Samuel. And against a team as talented defensively as Karen Crow, I imagine they'll start with trying to slow down that run and slow down Destin Hill. And I think there may be some opportunities there for Aaron Anderson to really live up to the most hype that he's had at any point in his career and show how dynamic he is with the ball in his hands, one, but also how much more complete of a receiver he's become than when we saw him start getting onto the field in the Dome over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Aaron is number 4 on my list, so I'll just get my piece on him out of the way. I think I said this around October. I think it was my second time seeing him. I think he's the most explosive player in the state, regardless of classification, and I think that that's been that way since about this time last year. Aaron had a chance to be the MVP of the state championship game when Carr and Easton faced off last year, and I think that he very well would have been, if not for a couple of drops and a couple of turnovers that led to Easton scores. But if you took those out of the equation, he's absolutely dynamic. He did commit to LSU, which now people are now more aware of his name and who he is. But he's been that dude for Carr. I think the biggest thing for me with Aaron, he is the guy that they try to target in these big moments. And you said it perfectly. Destin is their number 1 receiver. He probably leads them in every category. But it's Aaron they go to for the big play, for the spark. He's their kickoff guy, their punt return guy. And he stretches the field from the seams. He can make plays with it. I mean, he's fantastic. And a year after all those drops and turnovers, I'm really excited to see what he does, because he did spend most of the offseason working on those hands, and he did get ejected from the first quarter of last week's game. So I'm sure he's going to be coming out with a purpose. My next guy is a guy that we've been talking about after that game, LaTerrence Welsh, cornerback for Acadiana, just outside the top 100 on Rivals for 2022. I didn't even know who he was last year. We found him about 12 months ago when they played Destrehan, and in the Dome last year, he eliminated now TCU signee Quincy Brown out of Destrehan, who was basically unstoppable every round, every game, every Friday night before that. But LaTerrence he knows how to jam. He's fantastic in coverage. He's a big hitter, which is obviously something you look for with corners. So I think that obviously, you're going to be playing Alexandria. They're going to try it on the ground where he's going to be tested as a tackler. But he does have that coverage background. We talk about, some of these receivers and Shield Taylor. Do you move someone like LaTerrence around? I'm excited because he's only played 1 game this season, but he is definitely the headliner on that defense that I'm anxious to see.
Yeah, he's actually who I had written at number 7, coincidentally. All the reasons you just said. I was so looking forward to seeing him this year. He had the huge spring and summer where offers started to fall in place, and then we haven't seen him much this year. And so all those times I've seen Acadiana this year, I've had a chance to see Cam George and Walter Bob and Caleb Arsenault and Derek Bercier Jr. and the many Ian Monts, all the players on that defense, pretty much except for LaTerrence, who just finally returned to action. And so having an opportunity to see him now, a guy who, like I mentioned with Quincy and Jordan Allen, he was a player on my LSU prospects to know, despite not having an offer yet. I know LSU has been very well aware of him since last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if that comes from at some point. And so the opportunity to see him against an offense like Alexandria, where he can be a versatile piece on that Acadiana defense, and he's going to probably be tested a little bit. And certainly for a guy that's just getting back into the swing of things, if I'm Coach Bachman, I probably want to try and test him a little bit and just see how right he is. But he has an opportunity to have another huge state championship game and kind of show us what we've all been waiting to see for all his delays getting back to the field this year.
Yeah, he is definitely, probably my storyline for Acadiana to see what he looks like. And I think it's great that he came back for the semis. I mean, it just adds to Acadiana's fire and fuel. Number 1 seed, in line for the state championship, and they get their number 1 defensive back. Number 6 is probably the lineman that I have the biggest man crush on after seeing them in person this year, and that's my guy Emory Jones from Baton Rouge Catholic. When we saw him against STM, I thought he was fantastic. On tape, I was a little bit iffier on him after his sophomore year, but he's big. He's got a basketball background. He's got fantastic feet. He's in really good shape. I know he plays left tackle for Catholic. I think he could play tackle or guard at the next level. And obviously they're going to run the ball down Bird's throat if they can. And I'm excited to see what Coach Fertitta does to maybe get Emory Jones pulling. We know he can seal. We know he can kick out. I love his athleticism, and I think he's a person that after you see in person, you have a greater appreciation for. And I'm expecting a lot of big runs from George Hart and Corey Singleton from right behind him on the left side. I'm not sure if there's a defensive lineman that's going to be able to slow him down, but this would be a good case for him to really establish himself as the top lineman in the state for 2022 in Louisiana.
Yeah, he's a big part of that where Coach Orgeron talks about an excitement for a better offensive line class in 2022 in Louisiana than what has been the case recently. He's a big part of that among the top end of guys in the state to watch. For number 6, I have another guy that we're certainly familiar with from that 2022 class. Haven't had a chance to see him in a varsity game this year, but Landry Liddy is a guy that we know more from off-season stuff, and now this is his first year as a starter as the quarterback for that number 1 seeded Calvary Baptist team. I'm very excited to see him, as well as this is kind of a cheat spot because that includes Joseph Wilson and Jordan Wallace and everything around him and just how he distributes the ball, plus the swagger that he's kind of picked up with handing out Starburst to people has really amused me through this playoff run, where he kind of caught a little bit more of an edge to him in his first year starter than I necessarily expected to see. And I know they are extremely eager for the opportunity to face the reigning champion Ouachita Christian Eagles. They were really excited for the opportunity to face Langlois and company at Catholic Point Capee in the playoffs. They were excited when they got a late opportunity because of COVID changes to the schedule to face Rummel at one point. There's not really a lot that he shies away from, and so he's going to go out there and look for opportunities to sling it to those other 2 dudes I mentioned, regardless of who was on the other side of the field. And I think that makes for a lot of fun when Calvary plays OCS.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see Landry in his first live action game. Like you said, we've seen him a ton throwing. I've been to a practice at Calvary last year when the coaches just raved about, what's ahead at quarterback, and that's when they had a senior there. So they've known that they've had a special passer sitting back there, and I'm excited to see him in person. It should be some really good quarterback play throughout the week in beautiful downtown Natchitoches. Looking for sponsors for this podcast from the beautiful city. No, I'm super excited to see Calvary. And we touched on our number 4 player, Aaron Anderson. We both discussed how exciting he is. Let's talk about a little bit about his teammate, Destin Hill. I think, from my perspective, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, I love to see how players, when you do know about them from the time they're freshmen or sophomore, and now you're seeing them as seniors, I love to see the development. I think what Destin has done is he's taken his game, has added a new element to it over the years. We've always known he has vertical speed, and, about 11 months ago, he clocked a 4.3 in San Antonio. So we know that he can play at any level when it comes to speed. What he did earlier in the playoffs with just, playmaking with the ball in his hands after the catch, that's an element that no Carr receiver has had since Racey McMath. And Destin is as physical and hard to tackle as maybe Jamar Chase was. I know they're both from New Orleans, so it's an easy comparison, but he is mean. Destin plays with a chip on his shoulder. I've seen him get better at making contested catches, body control, circus catches. He is, susceptible to a drop here and there, but I would really love to see how much of a playmaker he can be. And, Karen Crow only has so many DBs to cover so many receivers, and they are about 6 or 7 deep on Huntley Drive. So I'm very curious, is it going to be a Destin game because he could take over this game, or will it lend itself to Aaron Anderson and Yaroon McMath and one of the Simmons receivers? There's probably 10 of them on the roster. They had a big family. Someone I can even keep going with the Carr receivers. I just made another profile for another one I liked against Easton. They are so deep, but Destin, of course, is the headliner. He is the senior. And if I know the coaches at Carr, they kind of probably want to send him off, not only with a 5th championship, but maybe a really big game to remember him before he signs in February.
And so you, I guess, have the 2 Carr receivers at year 5 and 4, the senior and then the junior. Destin is a guy that I think we talk so much with LSU fans about knowing Chris Hilton and Brian Thomas, and I think Destin's right up in that mix among the top trio of receivers in the state for this class. I guess I'll kind of hit 5 and 4 since we have year 4 in Aaron as well. Number 5, I have Terrence Williams from Manny, who was one of the bright spots in a really rough state championship appearance for them a year ago, where they had to settle for runner-up. Had a nice game, showed his running ability, his toughness, grinding out some pretty tough yards up the middle, and I think worked quite a bit through this weird offseason to work on his footwork and his receiving ability and put himself into that same mix I mentioned with Kendra among some top running back prospects in the state outside of Logan Diggs and Catravian Hargrove. And so I know this is a year that Manny's really looked forward to getting back into a state championship game after the way last year went and ending it on the right foot this time. And I think Terrence is a guy that is going to be really key in that conversation. He had success in the tough go last year, and I think that this ends up being a better outcome for them, certainly a closer game than what we saw against Faraday, and that they're going to give Terrence a lot of opportunities to run the ball and probably a close physical game against Kinder. And my number 4 is another receiver who was in play for LSU, the 2023 kid, Shelton Sampson Jr., who we saw run those sub-4 440s at the Catholic Combine this summer, and not really have, I think, the type of full season that a lot of us were anticipating in terms of numbers for Catholic. They have run the heck out of the ball. He ended up with, I think, 168 yards for most of this season on 9 catches and had a touchdown. But then in the semifinals, as he starts to get healthy from a little nagging injury he had, as the freshman quarterback Daniel Beal starts to hit his stride, Shelton put up those numbers in the semifinal alone with 168 yards and 3 touchdowns. And so if he can kind of carry that momentum, I think Bird is going to have more success slowing down Catholic rushing than most teams have. Not saying by any means they're going to stop them, but they may have to throw a little bit more than a few teams they've faced this year made them. And if those opportunities are there where Gabe and company are looking to the air, if Shelton can kind of build off that momentum, I've looked at this sophomore year playoff run for him similar to what we saw from Chris Hilton as a sophomore, where a light kind of clicked late in the year. And suddenly that's when you see that big step forward and some of the big numbers start to fall into place. And so if he can have a state championship game half as memorable as Chris's sophomore year state championship game, then it's a pretty good week. But I'm just excited to see what exactly we can get from him in the final game of this year for he and his team.
I think the Chris Hilton West Monroe game is my favorite state championship game of all time. And that includes Chris running into my knee right before the first half came to an end and surviving to advance. I'm super. He's one of those younger kids where I kept him off the list because he's such a young pup. But I think that's great analysis, Jerit. I think that yes, Catholic and Coach Fertitta, well, they want to run the ball and have a ton of success. But if Bird is up to the challenge, which you'd expect the team playing in the state title game to slow down the Bears running game, they have to go to the air, and he is their number 1 target. I think the quarterback play from the freshman is a key reason why Shelton has started to kind of pop up a little bit later in the season. I think that they now know that they can turn to him in the passing game if need be, and that's a big spot for a sophomore. So, doing it as a sophomore, you don't expect them to be leading the state in receiving, but to be able to turn to him in a key moment like a state championship game would definitely loom large. And the Chris Hilton, catch and run, and then obviously the jump ball in the end zone against West Monroe has been glued in my mind for 3 going on 4 years. So if Shelton does something like that in beautiful downtown Natchitoches, then he's going to be a top 100 prospect just like Chris was, basically from that game on and never disappointed. Sticking with receivers, and we talk about leading the state, Jack Betch, I kind of forgot about him. He's definitely on my list. I don't think anyone's been able to slow down Jack this year. I don't know, there hasn't really been the DB that's been able to kind of stop this hybrid receiver, flex tight end. I don't even know what position I come up with him for. But I am curious to see how Coach Manali and De La Salle does. Obviously, they know who Jack is. He did his thing against them last year in the state championship game. I can assure you that the De La Salle defense is the heart of that, the unit of that team that needs to step up. I think that they'll be able to run the ball pretty effectively against STM, but I don't know how they plan on stopping Walker Howard to Jack Betch. I don't know if they have a DV that's capable of lining up against him. So how many defenders do they have to devote to Jack? 1, 2, is a safety leaning over the top as well? I'm curious to see what the plan is to slow him down, because no one's been able to slow down that 1-2 punch of Walker to Betch. And I think, for the kid who flipped his commitment and was a little bit unsure because of all the craziness surrounding LSU, but, wound up signing with his dream school, a chance to go out with a state championship is obviously something you kind of root for a lot of these seniors. And Jack, we've grown very close to. And I think that's a really great game against a really great defense. And if they're going to do it one more time, they have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, everything you mentioned is I agree with completely on Jack. Seeing him go out on top after the record-setting career he's had, and I talked to him at the beginning of the playoffs about how cool it would be for him to win a state championship with his buddy Walker Howard and then go off to the dream school in LSU. And you mentioned some of that De La Salle dynamic. I think Montreal Johnson and Jamarian Peterson are two guys that were, again, just shy of my top 10 on here. But my number 3, I put Walker Howard because we saw Jack play some as a sophomore a couple years ago. We saw him be a huge piece of that state championship run with Caleb Holstein a year ago. And we've seen Walker be fantastic in his first year as the varsity starting quarterback, but now he has an opportunity to go play in his first state championship game and connect with his buddy Jack Besh and all the other weapons around him, the 2 senior Carters on that offense. And so I know he's going to want to put a cap on his first year as a starter in a big way and in this big stage for him, a state championship game, as well as have his last high school game with Jack be one to never forget for those guys, as they then have to wait another year to reconnect in purple and gold.
Yeah, Walker is my number 2 guy. So just to kind of piggyback off what you said, I think that Walker in 1 year's time has established himself as the best quarterback in the state, regardless of classification. That includes, the 2023 class, which has been phenomenal. And we're very excited about those young passers. But right now, there's not a quarterback in this state I would put ahead of Walker Howard to win a game right now. I think it's absolutely – I think there's been so much hype around Walker because of who his dad was, and, he got offers before when he was Caleb Holstein's backup. But for him to step up into the starting job and have STM as a nationally ranked team on max preps as quickly and seamlessly as possible – one thing with Walker, when you are a young prospect and you have, you're going off your last name before people get to know your first name, is people set expectations. And more often than not, at least in our jobs, I feel like it's more often underwhelming than overwhelming. But Walker has been as good or better than expected. He has such a phenomenal arm. It's such a live arm. Could put it anywhere on the field. His accuracy downfield in the short passing game is phenomenal. He's mobile. He's athletic. Can make plays with his legs. He can extend plays. And I think his confidence is something that has been developed over the last couple of months that I think maybe before he committed to LSU versus, going into Northwestern State, when is their game? Monday? The difference in their level of confidence and the way it's affected his play has loomed really large. And I am so excited to see him on this stage with Jack against a really fantastic defense to possibly put a bow on this year. But no one has been able to solve Walker. He's been clutch. He's been effective. He's been phenomenal. And now he's a top 50 player in the country, and he's got his biggest game yet.
And I have another Lafayette guy, another elite prospect as my number 2, and one of very few of these guys that I have seen quite this much of on Friday nights in high school games and in state championship games. But Sage Ryan, to me, I have very high because obviously he's now LSU signee, Sage Ryan, and all the excitement there. We've known he's a fantastic player. But it's kind of cool to me to have seen him for the first time as a big contributor as a freshman in a state championship game in the Superdome, and to see him in the state championship every year and all the things that he's had a chance to do for that program. And for him to miss that semifinal against Newman, I know was really tough for him. He wants to be out there with his teammates and he wants to compete. And so LCA is optimistic that they maybe have him back in time for their state championship game this week. And that's one of the big things that I'm watching all week, is just hoping for him and for that team, regardless of what it means for a final score, just that he has that opportunity to go out kind of on his terms and playing for a state championship, because he's been so integral to them doing so every year to this point, that I hope for him that we get a chance to see him go out there and play one more game with Jordan and Brylan and Fitzgerald West Jr. and for, his coaches, Trev and Jacardi and all those guys, because I would be really upset if he had his career end at the high school level 2 games early because of a hamstring. And so I know they're kind of monitoring that, but I think we're going to probably get a chance to see him, and I'm really excited about that for him.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head. I mean, he's been integral to the success of this program and establishing himself as kind of the kings of this division, this classification for the last couple of years. And Sage was the first profile I created on Rivals when I got this job, and I will put that on my tombstone one day, because I've never seen such a dynamic player. In terms of when the time came to determine if he was a 5-star, and he's my number 1 player, so I am opening the doors to talk about him. It's hard to see someone dominate in all 3 phases of the game as seamlessly and naturally as he does. He is unequivocally the heart and soul of that team. The fact that we talked about it with Jordan earlier, he doesn't even play defense 100, every single snap. He goes on for 3rd down or 2nd and long. Is it a critical down after, they need a stop? And he's able to make a difference every time he's on the field. I remember when we went up there for the Notre Dame game, I don't think he played defense the whole first quarter. The first snap he came in at the goal line, he lines up in the nickel and gets a tackle at the goal line for a loss of 5 yards, and I think they wind up not scoring, which is just incredible to think about that impact. And then when he gets back in coverage, he can cover a ton of real estate. He's a number 1 or number 2 safety in the country, but he's more than a safety. He's a nickel. He's a corner. He's just a do-it-all defensive athlete. Last week, I remember I listened to Nelson Stewart just talk about the tape study that they did leading up to the LCA game, and that they were almost petrified of what Sage would even add to that LCA defense that was dominant against Newman. So like you said, I am just hoping to see him one more time at the high school level to just appreciate everything that he does for LCA. If he does play, I expect him to also play most of his snaps on offense, which you get to see this tiny little DB just out physical and outrun everyone on the field. But I am excited to hopefully catch him one last time. And if it's against St. Charles Catholic, that Frank Monica's defense is going to be ready. I don't know if 11 people is enough to stop Sage Ryan. You might need 12 or 13 or 14, but he is definitely my number 1 player that'll be in Natchitoches. And I am just crossing my fingers that we can see him play one more time, because he has been so fantastic in these big state championship games year after year. We've been unable to see him the last couple of years for, a various degree of reasons.
And another guy that I think a lot of folks in North Louisiana feel like they don't have enough players to stop him when they have 11 on the field is much different end of the spectrum. Another young guy, the sophomore Trey Holly from Union Parish, who has rushed for over 2,600 yards and 43 touchdowns as a sophomore in this weirdly short COVID season. And so he's a guy that he's up there in damn near Arkansas, and I've only had a chance to see the huddle clips and the numbers, the gaudy as heck numbers that come out with over 200 rushing yards every Friday night to this point, and have been just waiting for an opportunity to see him in person and see kind of what that level of fuss and those level of numbers are about with my own 2 eyes. And so to have a chance to see him now in a state championship game against a pretty big physical 3A defense in Madison Prep, I think this is an opportunity for us to get really a better sense of what to expect from him over the next few years. and what type of prospect he can be. He's still a young guy and he's undersized. So Grambling State was kind of the first one to come in on him recently. Does he have an opportunity to kind of build that over these next few years? And beyond just us, an opportunity for the most eyes that have ever been on one of his games before now that the Farmers get back to a state championship game, because I always joke that I don't think people in South Louisiana still somehow have a clue who Trey Holly is for the most part. And so this is going to be kind of a big opportunity for he and his teammates to hop back on the radar. If you're the Farmers and haven't been in this position in several years, I think it was 2013 where they made that run to a state championship, or for Trey Holly, the biggest game of his career.
Yeah, and Trey is one of those guys who was right on the cusp of making my top 10 list. You know, and you're right. As someone who lives in South Louisiana, it wasn't until Jerit Roser was like, no, dude, you need to take a look at this sophomore. And I did watch the tape, and he's someone that I will most certainly have my eyes on. I was really impressed with his tape. Like you said, obviously it's a run-dominated team, but when you're in a state championship and you talk about Madison Prep having a lot of talent, a talent-laden 3A defense, this is no question the biggest game he'll play in. It's the game that'll have most eyes and most talent on the other side of the ball. And if he can make those plays, you know, as we start gearing up for this 2023 class in Louisiana, he's going to be in the forefront of that. Some other names along with Trey, Brylan Green is a fantastic undersized safety, but he hits as hard as anyone in the state. When I talked about Jordan Allen, Brylan was certainly in the mix to be discussed as well. You mentioned, his teammate Fitzgerald West. Probably his best game that I've ever seen him was in that Notre Dame game, and he was really phenomenal, active in the trenches. Montreal Johnson and Jamarian Peterson, two recent decommitments who will sign in February out of De La Salle. De La Salle is going to win that game. Montreal Johnson's probably having a big game. And they also have a teammate, freshman Kendrick Richardson, has an LSU offer. LSU has not been very active at De La Salle over the years. Landry Liddy, of course, was on my list. Corey Singleton, we did discuss a little bit. My last guy was also Macy Lewis. I thought he was incredible against Newman. I thought he was probably the player I was underwhelmed. Not underwhelmed, but a little. I didn't really see him too actively making plays in that Notre Dame game, but he was all over the place for Newman. He's really athletic at outside linebacker, and he's still an underclassman. So those are all. And the best part about state title games, we don't know anything. More people will create names for themselves, and we'll be just there to film it.
Yeah, I mean, all the guys you mentioned, I have Tyrell Raby on here, Bailey Despani.
Oh, we forgot about Raby. Yes, Raby is sitting there, and he's a difference maker. He just, he's a difference maker.
Those guys, Hunter Herring again, after fully committing to football. I mean, at the point that they're making that run as OCS last year, he's still committed to go play baseball. Thought football was kind of a second thing, and now he is going to be a college quarterback for the Cajuns, and so he's really put in a ton of work in the offseason. But yeah, like you said, I mean, we didn't know who the heck Sage Ryan was 3 years ago as a freshman coming into the Dome with LCA, and there's going to be a lot of those guys. I wasn't even thinking about, you mentioned Paul Richardson for De La Salle, who Paul, yeah, the old man who is a freshman for his high school team. But
Paul,
he's a guy that I wasn't even thinking about when I was putting together the LSU list, just because that seems so far away before he has to make a college decision. But we're going to see some guys, some really young guys like a him or a Daniel Beal or whoever as freshmen, as well as maybe some of these seniors that have just been more quiet in terms of the recruiting angle of it, but are key pieces to their team in terms of a leadership and experience, and with this opportunity just kind of really shine in that final moment and go out playing out of their minds.
No better time to do it than the state championships. It used to be the Dome, but now it's Natchitoches. So
yep,
we'll be looking.
Going up to the Natties. We'll be up there Sunday through Wednesday for these 9 state championship games. They start off on Sunday with that 2A game between Manny and Kinder, and then that night closes out with Catholic High and Bird, and the 5A game on Wednesday will close out the entire LHSAA football season that, as you mentioned when we were starting out, we didn't know at one point that we were going to have the season. So the fact that we're having 9 state championship games is certainly exciting for us and extra exciting for
in
all
one
these
venue.
kids. Yeah, in one venue, which I love, obviously.
That's a big deal.
To be able to see all these guys at once.
Absolutely. I think that's one step in the right direction. You know, credit to the LHSAA and everyone involved for at least one venue, 9 state championships, and let's just cross our fingers after these fantastic 9 games. It's 2021, and we can flip the script and start talking about spring football coming back sooner rather than later. And let's get back to New Orleans for 2021. Come on.
There you go. Keep up with us through the week. He's Sam Spiegelman on Twitter, Sam Spiegs. I'm Jerit Roser on Twitter, Jerit Roser. We'll be all over the Rivals Network and TigerDetails.com and Louisiana versus all y'all and Prep Red Zone Louisiana. Thanks for watching and looking forward to seeing everyone up in Natchitoches.